I'm here with Dr. Philippe Lemoine. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon. We work together at the Marina Del Rey Hospital, Cedars-Sinai Marina Del Rey Hospital. And we've known each other for at least 10 years,
Sure.
I think. Yeah,
Sure.
We've done some surgeries together that were a lot of fun, and showed me how to crack a rib again and put a chest tube in.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to go over race, black and white race, racism, slavery, genetics, cover a lot of topics. Philippe, you were really helpful to me. I reached out 2 to 3 weeks ago, I guess, and we had a great conversation. You helped me put in context George Floyd's murder and race in America and where we stand, and it really helped me to kind of understand the bigger picture of how these things fall in. And so the purpose of tonight's talk is just to go over some topics, ask certain questions, and cover things that sometimes people don't want to talk about or ask about. And we're both pretty reasonable people, at least we think we are, and
We'll find out.
yeah, exactly. And so we'll just go over some topics and see if this can help be educational and get everybody on the same page to find a path moving forward. And so appreciate you guys all joining. If you have any questions, put them down there, and if we see them, we'll respond to them too. And so we'll start with, let's take it back to the beginning and the advent of humankind and evolution. And are there actually differences between white and black people? And when you just look at us physically in the world today, we think there are differences. For instance, I think one of the questions I asked you was, is it kind of obvious that black people tend to be more muscular and have stronger muscles and bigger butts and generate more power so they can be better athletes? Whereas white people, perhaps the English, why were they able to colonize the entire world? Well, are they good organizers and have brains that can sit down in a dark, cold room in the north and study and be organized? Is that a genetic difference? Is that a physical difference that then gets manifested into the world? And so what's your answer to that question to start off?
Well, I think for hundreds of centuries, people have tried to ascribe a difference, a genetic difference, or an intellectual difference, or even an athletic difference to the races. And I've never supported that myself. I try to speak for myself only. African Americans are not a monolithic culture with a singular attitude or opinion. So my opinions are my own from my experience as an African American. I don't feel that there has ever been any proof that shows that one race is superior to another in terms of genetics, intelligence, lifespan, survivability, etc. There are sociological and cultural environmental differences that have manifested themselves over the centuries that we've been able to study. But there's been no scientific study that says that one group is better or superior than another. Now, there have been opportunities that have presented themselves to different cultures that have allowed them to dominate civilizations, but those go back thousands of years. In our recent memory, we can say there has been an Anglo-Saxon domination of the world, but that has not always been the case. If you go back thousands of years, you can argue that the Egyptians were the center of civilization, knowledge, and intelligence. And last I checked, Egypt was on the African continent. So
right, that's good. And that relates to one thing that I saw recently about the genetics of humans is actually greater than 99.9% the same. And in fact, there was, and I can't validate this fact, but what I heard is that black Aborigines and black Africans are actually on the farthest end of the spectrums as far as the variance within the human genetics.
Interesting.
Not the most similar, but actually on the exact opposite. And white people and brown people and everything are in the middle of that. And so it just kind of shows you that it's not genetics, that genetics are at least 99.9% the same, and therefore changes that we see in body size or type or color or whatever are really environmental and social. and that race is actually a social construct and an adaptation to your environment.
Absolutely.
And that leads to, when people put up statistics as a doctor, we're always going over statistics and trying to determine, are they a correlation or a causation? And when people put up statistics about COVID, for instance, and I'm going to just point out that we have this barrier between us. This is our COVID barrier, and that's why we're talking at the camera. When people talk about like COVID statistics, that black people are getting more affected by COVID than white people and other statistics, and therefore there is institutional racism in the healthcare system, and even in the economic system and in the job, more frontline workers, but that the statistical difference proves causation of racial discrimination and systemic racism. Part of me says, well, is that true? Is that actually causation, or is that just a correlation? Is there multifactorial accounts for it? But if you take into account that genetics are greater than 99.9%, but then we do see differences statistically, well, then what else is there except systemic racism?
Absolutely. There is a seminal book in the late 70s, early 80s called Medical Apartheid. I'm sorry, I don't have the author's name. It was a woman, and she characterized the multitude of systemic racist effects upon the ability of people of color to obtain adequate health care. And it's really amazing that statistically, people of color in the same situation are unable to receive the same level of care in our healthcare system. It can go from, in my profession, coronary artery bypass surgery. It's very common for African American males to get lesser or different care than their Caucasian counterparts with the same biometric pathologies that exist within their situations. So the only way we can find a reason for this difference of care is an institutional, cultural, or application of racism in those situations.
Yeah, and I guess like with the COVID and with cardiac disease, sometimes we may, on the superficial level, say, well, it may be more economic. It may be, more poor hospitals located in poor neighborhoods, or overweight, or high blood pressure, or diet, and then kind of ascribe, but not scratching below the surface, says, yeah, but the difference in those factors are due to race.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like, yeah, it's multifactorial, but they all come down to race.
Yes.
As the common denominator.
And so body morphology, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, not only do these exist in a higher level in communities of color, but their ability to be treated by medical care is also dramatically decreased because of systemic racism. So that population of people is more at risk because of pre-existing conditions to COVID, as well. Especially in California, the frontline workers that are exposed to COVID are predominantly people of color. Even to say restaurant workers, nurses, orderlies within the hospital, people who are moving things from room to room within the hospitals. They are the frontline workers are most often people of color.
Yeah. And the neighborhoods, looking forward to potential solutions as far as neighborhoods. What food do you have access to? Which has been a big topic of, if it's fast food, if you can get a $5 cheeseburger, Coke, and a fries for $5, but then to go get some fruit and make a meal and whatever is going to cost you more or more laborious. Obviously, that's how economics then plays a role in the diet, which then plays in the pre-existing conditions that you can't necessarily blame on somebody for their behaviors as much as systemic racism that has led to it. Obviously, we all work on behaviors as something we can actually control, but it's not the number one factor.
Yes.
What about egalitarian? I remember you've told me before that you're an egalitarian. What does that phrase mean?
Well, to me, egalitarianism is a aspirational attitude, an aspirational sort of way of life. I'd love to be in a situation, in a societal circumstance, where all men are created equal. Where Martin Luther King's expression, the black children and white children have access to the same level equality throughout, but it's not possible. And at this time, and in our pursuit to egalitarianism, in our pursuit to equality, I fear the pendulum shift where we move from racist behaviors that affect one population to behaviors that are negative to the opposite population. I think that we can move toward the middle rather than move to the pendulum shifts which occur so often in our society and in our personal interactions.
Let me ask you a question about that. If you're referring to like affirmative action, or when you talk about the pendulum swinging, are you actually worried about white people being discriminated against because they're white? Do you mean that? Do you mean something different? I was going to say.
I wouldn't go that far. So every human being has prejudice. Every human being has implicit bias. We all have these characteristics or traits within ourselves that make us feel certain ways about certain people in certain situations.
Yeah.
But racism is different. Racism is the confluence of prejudice and power.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, there is no such thing as reverse racism. How can there be reverse racism if there is no power in the minority population?
Right.
You see, so things like affirmative action, which I feel are necessary in many circumstances. There's affirmative action exists in many situations. Affirmative action is no different than a welfare state. A welfare state for people who can't, or people who need, or people who are in trouble, who need a little bit of help. There's welfare for impoverished people, for poor people, uneducated people. There's welfare for airline industries and train industries. There are affirmative action, arguably, some of our two presidents ago, we had affirmative action that got that president in, who was a C+ student at Harvard, only because of his father's situation. Was he allowed to get into Harvard? So there are many different types of affirmative action. Legacy benefits for college students is a form of affirmative action. So affirmative action takes on a negative connotation. It's the negative connotation of affirmative action is a form of systemic racism. It's okay if someone is a legacy student and they get a few points up to get into, but it's not okay if they're affirmative action. A legacy student is the product of good genes and hardworking parents. And the affirmative action person is less likely to succeed well, and we're giving them a step up because they're from an underprivileged situation, and so. It's a difficult direction to go.
That's an excellent way to put it. I mean, I think you really phrased that very well, and that's one of the things that I've realized recently is, growing up in the 80s in LA, it was kind of like everybody was equal, and my approach has been to treat everybody equally and to move on and just. And as men, we never really talk about race. I mean, you and I have had a lot of great discussion about politics, and we have a very similar middle ground. But as a white guy, it's not like in between surgeries when we're sitting in a lounge, I want to ask you what it's like to be a black man in America. And do you feel racial discrimination? Because it's almost like asking about your sex life or something. It's kind of like that, such a personal thing. And it's almost like I feel weird bringing it up because maybe you don't want to talk about it. And it's not my place to make you talk about it. But at the same time, and that's what I have really been appreciative of this event, is it's provide the opportunity and the door to open to say, hey, let's talk about this.
In my mind, I am personally appreciative of your interest. Your interest is everything. We must talk. We must debate. We must challenge each other in these very difficult conversations, because that's what we haven't done up until this point. Your expressions of this is the way I grew up and this is the way I think about myself. What do you think about that? That you are questioning your own perspective on the world because you've seen, because of the George Floyd's video, George Floyd's death. The world, not just you, the world is saying, hey, there's something to this Black Lives Matter conversation. You're questioning your own perspective, how your place within the world, and that is so necessary and so important. And I'm just so grateful to you for your interest here. It's uncommon, and we certainly need so much more of this.
I appreciate
it's really what we need to move forward on.
I appreciate
these difficult conversations.
Right, and you make it easy. I mean, I appreciate the fact that I feel like we could talk about anything, but to that degree, I think one of the big moves as a white person is, and this I did a video early on this, is moving from I'm not racist and I really do my best to treat everybody equal, to realizing that I have directly benefited from the systemic racism that exists due to white privilege, not get defensive, not feel guilty, not overreact, don't feel like somebody's going to come steal everything I have because they don't think I'm worthy of it. It's more just, no, it's okay. Those things do exist. Yeah. Here is why. Here's the logical reason why they do exist. And therefore, like you said, I mean, the way you put that affirmative action is, I have gotten affirmative action my whole life. Just because of the system and because of everything. And so, it's really a great way to balance out, to broaden the consciousness of the discussion and the reality of it.
And when I talk about egalitarianism and the pendulum shift, I want to express myself and people hear me without them taking offense to it or think I'm talking down. I just want, I don't want an angry reaction. I don't want defensiveness in my conversation. I would prefer curiosity, the light bulb to go off, and for people to say, let me think about that. For my words to inspire some further discussion and self introspection in that regard.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we were gonna talk about the core of America and how slavery and stripping people of their identity and culture and family and human dignity and everything it means to be a human, and America benefiting from that. That is what built America and made America successful, leading to Jim Crow and segregation and the GI Bill and the Vietnam draft and housing discrimination and redlining. I think everybody kind of knows that. And that's why systemic. You're going.
I'm a 180 degrees difference of opinion there. I don't think people know that. And it's so hard for people who are not involved to hear these statistics and to really understand, because so many people take it as a beating. They don't want to.
Right. We got to talk about that again. Didn't that happen 50 years ago?
I didn't own slaves. Why should I suffer for something that happened so many hundreds of years ago? I didn't discriminate today.
Right.
Well, what I recognize and what I see today, what's going on in this world today, is that I personally didn't believe that Obama could be elected. We all hoped and prayed for this to be a post-racial world after Obama was elected, but it certainly wasn't. And arguably, Obama in many ways is more conservative than we expected him to be. And I wanted, I want people to read and understand that there is that nothing is new. To say people have heard it is not true. There is so much that is repetitious in our world. We can just talk about Rodney King.
Yeah, right.
Just talk about Rodney King. I watched the video the other day of Rodney King getting beaten.
It was 40 years ago, wasn't it?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And they beat him so much, they had to stop and take a break.
Right.
They took their time.
Right.
And there were the 4 officers were prosecuted, but there was a crowd of officers watching. And that's the whole point. If we don't understand that this has been going on for a long time, then there's no inspiration to investigate. How long has this been going on? In what fashion has this been occurring? There's no interest in history. We have to read. We have to understand the history. And we have to go after it in a way that doesn't punish everybody too much.
Right.
You know, I would much rather have someone, if I spout out 5 or 10 different facts, I'd much rather someone grab onto a fact and take it and then go read about it themselves to prove it to themselves, rather than just wave their hand at me and say, I don't want to hear it, or we've talked about that before. No, you may be looking at me and hearing something from me, but we all need to read.
Yeah.
We all need to go and read about these things, and there are 100 different books that that express these issues and how that's happened over and over and over again.
Yeah, and the clearest concept that I have that I mentioned before is that the discrimination in housing, if nothing else, and the job market, we'll just stick with housing, that there is no land left.
Yeah.
So if the distribution of land and housing was racially discriminated against, which is a fact with redlining and everything we talk about, nobody can dispute that if you even read any history. Well, generational wealth means this stuff gets passed down and there's no land left. Therefore, it still exists today by definition. And that exists in every structure.
So,
jobs and, like you said, college, alumni.
Absolutely. People, to understand the truth about institutional racism is that people who don't understand history, and I don't claim to be a historian, but people who don't understand history think that the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was the first time slavery was mentioned in the Constitution, just by outlawing it.
Right.
But the second article of the First Amendment to the Constitution, I believe it's the First Amendment to the Constitution, it describes the allocation of representation based on the number of people in a geography. So how many representatives would go to Washington, D.C., wherever the seat of our government was at the time? How many would be sent based on the number of people? And it was, one... They were counted as humans, 1 for each white person, 1 for each indentured servant, and 3/5 for all others.
Yeah.
3/5.
Right.
That is, if there isn't a greater institution in the history of our country than a Constitution.
Right.
That is the most formative foundational institution of our country, and that is the definition of institutional racism that we as African Americans, when our Constitution was formed, we were 3/5 of a white person.
Right.
That's and it escalates from there, and nothing is new.
Right. Right.
So we can talk forever about the documented forms of institutional racism, the GI Bill, redlining. It's amazing how, as you talk about real estate, how in terms of wealth, why is there a wealth discrepancy between white and African American populations? It's because of institutional racism. It's because African Americans, following every war, were not allowed to participate in the welfare state of the United States that elevated white populations above a poverty level.
Right.
You see?
Right.
The GI Bill was huge. Every soldier coming back from World War II was allowed, or at least on paper, was allowed to get low interest loans. All the neighborhoods of Los Angeles are filled with this post-war housing. All over the United States, post-war housing existed, beautiful new homes, and these GIs had access to these loans if they were white.
Right.
There's a statistic in Mississippi that GIs, there were 3,500 loans to GIs coming back from World War II in the 13 counties, in a 13-county area in Mississippi. Of those 3,500, 2 were given to African Americans.
Right. And even with the GI Bill, they talked about states' rights. That the
That's
states,
right.
mainly the southern states, said, well, this should be a state distribution, not federal. which can be used to discriminate against
Absolutely,
flat.
and that's what it's all about. It's the different, and so we talk about federalism, the Institute of States' Rights. Some people feel that that's a great thing. It's foundational to our country to avoid a monarchy. The states have to maintain their independence of will and legal product, but they did that on purpose. The administrator of the GI Bill program, by design, put the authority of the GI Bill into the states.
Right.
To prevent African Americans, I actually read an article on this, to prevent African Americans from having access to this. Over and over, nothing is new. The lack of real estate wealth is the primary reason why why there's a discrepancy between African American wealth and white wealth. And most studies show that in order for there to be equality of wealth, it's going to take several hundred years. It's not a generation or two.
Right.
Several hundred years because of everything that's gone on before.
Did a lot of African American people leave the South and move to Detroit and New York and even LA in order to escape that?
Absolutely.
And that's basically where the ghettos came from.
And so
ultimately.
after World War II,
Yeah.
after World War II, 87% of African Americans were in the South.
Right.
And
87%.
so 87%.
I didn't realize that.
And so for a huge percentage of the returning soldiers,
Yeah.
those in the South were prevented from this new wealth, the GI Bill opportunity. And there's a wonderful book, Isabel Wilkerson, Warmth of Other Suns, that describes the greatest migration the greatest intercontinental migration of people, where I don't remember if it's 6 or 60 million people, African Americans, I believe it's 6, migrated from the South to the North and the West after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And that migration stopped really in the mid 80s. Mm-hmm. and they were leaving to escape racism and poverty and Jim Crow, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent book.
And then you end up with poor, for lack of a better word, excuse my language, if you end up with ghettos in every major city in America, which then doesn't have the resource, doesn't have the economics, doesn't have the jobs, crime, gangs, leads into all the gangs in the 80s, the violence, which ultimately turns into crime bills, 3 strikes, incarceration, the jails being a source of money, private industry.
I just want to interject in that the occurrence of these ghettos and these socioeconomic circumstances was by design. It wasn't a passive occurrence that this just didn't happen. Ghettos occurred because of redlining. Ghettos occurred because of institutional racism that prevented the opportunity, the delivery of equal opportunity to all the populations of the United States. Okay, the banks conspired with the real estate agents to localize African Americans into certain geographies, and those certain geographies of people were denied loans to purchase homes, regardless of their financial status. If you came from a certain geography, if you were of African American race, you could not obtain a loan to move into that very nice new upcoming neighborhood. You couldn't get a loan to get a house.
Yeah.
You can't get a loan to get a house. Then even if you have money, then you're forced to be in an apartment. You're forced to be in an apartment in a neighborhood that is a monoculture, and the jobs and opportunities don't exist. If you're a free person with education and intelligence, and you are unable to work where you are, you move. That's the American way.
Right.
Capitalistic, you move. But these people could not.
Yeah.
They couldn't move. They couldn't participate.
Yeah. Slave labor, captured slave labor. Right. The moving on to crime, and we can talk about institutional racism in the criminal justice system and the incarceration of men between the age of 16 and 40, and how devastating that would be and has been for a population loss of fathers, loss of structure, everything else. Although obviously women provide most of that, but still the men, we have some role.
You are an educated man.
I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit to Prop 47, California. Some of the attempts to reverse the 3 strikes, reverse the incarceration, reverse the petty crimes, reverse the non-violent crime offenses. And I'm only going to speak from my perspective, which is here in Mar Vista, where the explosion of homeless people, and specifically single men between the age of 20 and 40, are using heroin, shooting up heroin and crystal meth on our streets. Able-bodied people who have shoes and backpacks. And,
yes.
And it's a small. I don't want to change our discussion because I realize that's a small blip, and I don't want to make it a bigger deal just because it's affecting me. When in reality, I realize it's a mild gripe from a privileged white man. I appreciate that, but at the same time, I see the effect of crime bills and crime and law and order serves a purpose. And so how do we reverse some of that and at the same time still have some law and order to where. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. When we talk about, I want to first couch my comments on the history of institutional racism. First, there was slavery.
Yeah.
Following slavery, there was convict leasing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Which is huge. So vagrants, African American males who were vagrants, would be picked up. There were laws if you had less than $2 in your pocket, you were considered to be a vagrant.
Yeah.
And the police, equivalent to stop and frisk, how much money do you have in your wallet? You don't have $3. I'm arresting you. You're therefore a vagrant. Now you get sentenced to the jail. It was a new form of slavery.
Right.
The book that characterizes this is called The New Jim Crow. The New Jim Crow. And that was the second level of slavery in the United States. And we can debate how slavery relative to crime has moved in the United States.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of studies show that there's no difference between the use of drugs in an African American population or a Caucasian population.
Yeah.
The reason why our jails are filled with a majority black and brown population is because of selective policing. The police aren't driving through your neighborhood.
Right.
Okay. Right. You don't see SWAT teams going into colleges.
Yeah, right.
To take the cocaine and the marijuana colleges because that's
the dorm rooms.
And the dorm rooms,
right.
And we know that that's where the overwhelming majority of it is.
Right.
And so. You and I had a discussion about the broken window philosophy, how police in the 70s and 80s increased policing in neighborhoods that were not that nice, that had effectively broken window neighborhoods, because by attacking petty crime, they could somehow have a decreased incidence of serious crime, murder, theft, etc.
Right.
But that policy, that attitude, that personality of policing has led to this overwhelming increase in black and brown people in prisons. Yeah. The privatization of prisons, that prison as profit. There's very little difference between prison as profit and the convict leasing that was occurring in the 40s and 50s. So it's a huge multifactorial problem. Very, very difficult for us to address it. But I think that many of the conversations from the Black Lives Matter are making us consider these other options when for using a bad expression, defunding the police. Doesn't mean defund the police. It means to change the allocation of resources within the policing system, such that if there is it's that the police are required to do too much with too little resources. Every policeman is required to be a social worker, a mental health professional, and many of these issues that we have with drugs, we have with homelessness. Many of the homeless are vets. Why don't we have housing for the vets? If we could, that would take 30 to 50% of the homeless off the street if we could just get housing for our vets when they come home.
Yeah.
PTSD is a huge problem that they didn't talk about in World War II. Now everybody who goes to war has PTSD.
Right. Seriously. We
Pretty
just
much.
assume that you do. If
You know,
you
you
don't,
have-
it would be abnormal.
Exactly.
Right.
And so coming back from war, from any mobilization, can be psychologically damaging and make it difficult for the vets to participate in this real world, this regular world in your very nice neighborhood that exists here. It's hard for them to adapt when they come back. So imagine if we were to apply those funds for for our powerful military police
Yeah.
in a different way,
Yeah.
such that we have a more proportional policing.
Right.
It's so important to talk about proportional policing. If you have someone with mental illness, you don't send a SWAT team to take down the mental illness.
Right.
If you have a broken tail light, or you make a U-turn in an intersection,
Yeah.
you don't die because of that. We have proportional policing.
Right.
And if someone is homeless and with mental illness associated with homelessness, here's an example.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Crazy Caucasian man, looking like Jesus Christ, half dressed in a corner, screaming and throwing rocks.
Yeah.
Now make him a 6'2" African American man, half naked, screaming and throwing rocks.
Yeah.
In our a stereotype of that situation, the African American man is very likely to die.
Yeah.
Make the Caucasian person female.
Right.
The black male is certainly much more likely to die. There's some statistics say African American men in similar situations are 21 times more likely to be the victims of police violence, death, and shooting than their Caucasian male counterparts. It's a big deal. How do we address the management of law and order? I challenge you to understand the history of law and order. That expression, law and order, is a big deal. That's Nixon.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, Nixon was the first law and order president, and Trump is presenting it, I'm the law and order guy.
Yeah.
I read an article about John Ehrlichman, who was involved with Nixon's campaign in the late 60s and 70s, where Ehrlichman, they created their Southern strategy and their law and order motif, whereby they associated marijuana with the hippies,
Right.
and heroin with African Americans.
Yeah.
That was their purpose, in order to divide and conquer,
Right.
so that the population of people that would support Nixon would vote in larger concentration than the people that they were attacking, the marijuana hippies and the heroin African Americans.
Right. Right.
So law and order is a touchy subject, because everybody wants law and order.
Right. Sure. It's security.
Everybody
Who doesn't
wants
want
security. Everybody wants security. Everybody
Right.
wants to walk down the street and be safe, but I don't want to walk down the street and be stopped by the police because I'm a black man.
Right. Well, and that's a big question about taking away, for instance, like the police and local schools, which we're talking about right now, which sounds totally reasonable, right? Why do you need guys with guns, cops with guns in schools? At the same time, my concern is, well, what about some student may get shot or
Right.
get hurt in those schools? Right. That's the hard part, is there's going to be examples. As we back off the law and order, there's going to be examples of innocent people dying, and then we're all probably going to freak out and go, oh, got to put the cops back in there. And to some degree, the police were put in certain schools and stuff to try and protect the kids.
Yes.
They weren't necessarily put there to punish everybody. They were actually, I think, were put there to somewhat help.
So if you read the legislation, if you read the language that puts police in schools, it's not racist.
Right.
But the application of the police in schools is racist.
Yeah.
Okay, I was debating with my daughter social media sites that have negative influences on women in a much greater sense than men in terms of negative body image.
Right. Sure.
Okay, but these websites are user-driven. That means the women who are writing in or their experiences are negatively influencing themselves as much as anybody else.
Right.
The code, binary code, computer code is not gender-related.
Yeah.
But still, the application of these social media websites has a negative effect on women. So our legislation, as we want to consider it to be egalitarian and race blind, the application of it is still racist. Stop and frisk in New York. You read stop and frisk, it's not racist.
Right.
But 80 to 90% of the people that were stopped were black.
Is it possible to do stop and frisk and just force the police to have a little ledger where whatever the proportion is in that community of white, brown, black, that they stop and frisk that percentage? Or is that just a stupid
That
solution?
requires big government.
Yeah, right.
Okay, that requires oversight.
Right.
Arguably, that's what we want that, and we don't want that.
Yeah.
You know, the best legislation, the best laws that exist have teeth that not only say the way the world should be, but say what is going to happen if the world isn't that way. Okay, so stop and frisk would be palatable to African Americans if there was egalitarian stopping and frisking.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. You know, after 9/11, there are comedians that joke about this. After 9/11, beige and brown people, black people, were stopped at huge numbers, especially at airports.
Right.
The joke was if your skin was darker than a lunch bag, you were going to get stopped. You were going to get checked.
Right.
How many buzz-haired Caucasian guys were stopped after Oklahoma City?
Right.
You know, it's not the laws aren't necessarily racist. The application of the laws are, and we need teeth. We need accountability, and there's another touchy word.
Yeah.
How do you hold the police accountable for their stop and frisk? It's a difficult situation.
Yeah.
But we are here today having this discussion because of the existence of this institutional racism.
Yeah.
If you don't consider if you defend the institution and say that it's not racist, then you have to look at Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, and understand that he was an instructor. And the 3 junior police taking care of him, I think 2 of them had been policemen for less than 2 weeks.
Right.
So I'm sure it wasn't part of their police manual
Right.
to do what Chauvin was doing.
Right.
But the instructor who had his power as to instruct them relegated through the Minnesota Police Department, Minneapolis Police Department.
Yeah.
That's institutional racism.
Yeah, I thought Van Jones put it so well on CNN. He said, look, we give police this power and this privilege of carrying firearms in community and these weapons of mass destruction. That is a huge trust in this body that we all invest in them.
Yes.
They got to do better. And the cops, and I take care of a lot of cops, and every cop I've spoken to said that Chauvin killed the guy.
Yeah.
And it was completely egregious, and he needs to be punished for it. I mean, no cop I've spoken to in any way defends what he did. But like you said, it's built in. It's built in the system. How do we move forward? One is the understanding it exists, the acknowledgement that systematic racism exists, that every white person can say that and mean it and know what it means. Obviously, is a huge first step. And then, obviously, you got any ideas?
For me, what you're doing is the most important thing. Just having the debate, being interested. You know, there's the famous Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. He said, "Few are guilty, all are responsible."
Yeah.
You know, and that's the few bad egg.
Right.
You know, the few bad apples sort of symbolism.
Right.
Well, you know, in every situation, in every society, we have bad apples. It's what did the other apples do?
Right.
What do the good apples do?
Right.
If there's passivity, if there's no groupthink, no, if we don't all police ourselves, nothing is going to change. And obviously, African Americans by themselves cannot change the situation.
Right. No, and you're right. And those few bad apples, it's kind of like within yourself. I just had a few bad moments.
Yeah.
But I've got 97% good moments. Well, that's not good enough.
It's not good enough.
If those 3 bad moments you killed somebody
That's
or raped or pillaged, and we have to accept responsibility for our society as a whole, especially when we benefit from it, pay for it, contribute to it, sustain it. That's I like that. It's a good way to put it. Steve Krems, who's another physician in our hospital, also said to me, he said, won't we potentially all, let me rephrase this a bit, that sense of security and insecurity, like the cops and the power and the control. Right. We all, and that's unfortunately what a lot of politicians tap into is our insecurity. Somebody's going to come and take something from you unjustly because you're white. They're going to steal something from you. They're going to
something that you've worked so hard for.
Something I've worked so hard for. You don't deserve it. You only got it because you're privileged, and we're taking it. And it feels like communism's moving in.
Right.
So that insecurity, realizing that you can step back from that and go, okay, maybe I will lose 5 or 10%. And I try and be very aware that because I'm white and male and I'm privileged, but I'm also wealthy, which is a whole nother privilege, that I never want to sell out poor white people in that, let's make all these changes, do all this other kind of stuff to help everybody, and I can afford to pay an extra 5 or 10%, but, and then screw the poor white person, and so it's kind of, we have so many layers of complexity of who we are, but that was a mild diversion. I think my main point was that getting away from the feeling of insecurity, somebody's going to take my stuff, to aren't we better off if we do help each other, and if everybody has more of an egalitarian start and we're all in this together and we all really are connected to humanity and all of us and God and everything that connects us together, that it's not like I'm losing 5%.
That's right.
I'm paying 5%. I'm giving back 5% because it's going to make us all more whole and healthy and the way things frickin' should be.
It's hard to have faith in that system. A rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
It's hard to have faith. Doorknobs and water faucets. They're designed now for handicapped people. The doorknob that bends like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
In every hospital, every place we go, the water faucet is a single lift, not 2 now, made for handicapped people.
Right.
We discover that the knob for the handicapped person is good for the able-bodied person as well.
Right.
And I don't mean to equate minorities, African Americans, with the handicapped, but if we help everybody, if we help one group, we help everybody. That's what I'm trying to
I appreciate that. It's a great analogy. And one of the things about America that I have found challenging is we're such a big country and so diverse, and we're so raised on capitalism and the strife and the violence and the entrepreneurialism. Because I wake up every day feeling like I'm going to be attacked and I got to get out there and battle and do what I got to just fire. I don't even know where that comes from. It's some weird idea that I wake up in a certain level of fear every day.
I agree.
It's kind of insane. It's not actually based on reality.
My attitude: where's the knife coming from next?
Right.
I gotta have my guard
on
up.
edge all the time.
All the time.
Which makes me frickin' do stupid videos and Facebook and develop apps and learn a new technique. So there's some good energy to it if you put it in the right way. But my point about America is it's such the history of America to have that strife and violence and edge and conflict that may drive us in ways. And that's when I kind of look at Europe and you hear about Sweden and these other countries and how great socialized medicine is and how great everything is. Well, they're so homogenous that, they can look at each other. It's easier as humans to look at each other if we look the same and feel more of a sense of common value and purpose and maybe this rising tide. And in America, because we're all so different and this conflict and strife, I think it's hard for it. I think it's such a abstract term, almost abstract thought to think that we're all connected and we're going to help each other, that I think but maybe this violence in the streets and the protest and more specifically the violent deaths of black people dying at the hands of white people, those images to make us wake up and to realize that we're in this together. Because if we keep fighting, we're going to kill each other. And
I'm too near you not to hear you. It's the angle of the camera angle on George Floyd was what said everything. There have been numerous videos. Eric Garner, I Can't Breathe.
yeah,
Huge black man in a chokehold, falling. And before he said the chokehold, before he got the chokehold and they pulled him down, he kept saying, "Why are you stopping me? Why are you always stopping me? I didn't do anything. Why are you always stopping me?"
yeah, right. He was just over it. Just
By report, he was selling cigarettes.
right.
You know that it's a difficult thing to see, but nothing is new.
Yeah,
What is new, the outrage that we're seeing, the sensitivity that we're seeing, and I thank you for that, is because of Chauvin's eyes.
Yeah.
As he looked in the camera for 8 minutes and 46 seconds with his hands in his pockets, knowing he was being filmed,
yeah,
and saying, "I don't care."
yeah. He said, "F you. I got the power. You can't do anything about it." And I totally agree that dichotomy of both being in the same picture.
Yeah.
Of the black man was suffering, asking for his mom, pleading for his life, still calling the officer, "Sir, please help me."
We all watched as George Floyd slowed.
Yeah, right.
We watched him become dusky. We watched the life leave his body.
Yeah,
And Chauvin continue to rock on his neck.
yeah,
I hate to say it, but I wish we had some different camera angles on the other ones.
yeah. Right. I agree. No, and for me as a white male, to see the white male looking in the camera and saying "F you," there's not a damn thing you can do about it.
Right.
I felt complicit in that. That's what helps me realize that the systemic racism is oppressing people, and I am complicit and contributing and benefiting and everything else from it. And it just, yeah.
That's why these conversations, these debates that we're having are so important. We have to challenge each other. There's video of Ahmaud Arbery being shot.
Yeah.
Recently the 3 men that were involved in his shooting have been indicted. They've been brought up on charges.
Right.
So things are moving forward in that situation. But the story is that the man who was videotaping, he and his lawyer released the video of Ahmaud Arbery being shot because they felt it would exonerate them.
Right. Right.
So what is amazing to me is the different set of eyes that exist in this United States. How I can look at it and I see that Ahmaud Arbery was, many people say he was lynched. They waited for him, they ran him down, and they shot him.
Right.
The son, by report, had racial expletives that he used
Yeah.
after he shot him.
Right.
I can look at that and say he was murdered.
Yeah.
But a different set of eyes will look at it and somehow they justify the behavior.
Right.
Zimmerman,
Right.
somehow his behavior was justified when he killed a 16-year-old boy.
Right. Yeah.
The names, we could keep going. Say their names. We could keep going
Yeah.
over and over and over again. I am so appreciative of the sensitivity that has come because of George Floyd's death. When people are going, "Wow, this is a real thing."
Yeah. Yeah. And let me ask you a question about resisting arrest for police officers, because I take care of so many cops and I see them have so many back injuries from literally wrestling people to the ground.
Sure.
That for me, my perspective several months ago was, that's crazy that a cop is supposed to wrestle somebody to the ground. Like, if you resist arrest, you should be tased or shot, because we shouldn't expect people to wrestle other people. Like, we need to not resist arrest. And I realize my ignorance in that, to the degree that, that's one mild aspect of it. And I still agree with that. Like, what is this middle ground of, what are the cops supposed to do? Yeah. But I really hear what Van Jones said was, the bottom line is, if they're going to have a gun, they can't be frickin' shooting people.
Yeah.
They cannot be killing people, especially if there's any racial discrepancy, and not a reason to kill somebody. If there's another means to do it.
So what happens often in these situations is the presentation. So when someone dies under the hands of the police, often the first thing the police representative says is, this person had a long record,
Right.
was a bad guy.
Right.
It's effectively saying, she was dressed provocatively. She
Right.
wanted us to rape her.
Right.
Those comments diminish the responsibility that the police have to everyone. Police are supposed to police. They're not supposed to be judge, jury, and executioner.
Right.
I don't want to diminish the difficulty of their jobs.
Right.
It's a hard job. I couldn't do it. Sometimes it's an impossible job, and we have to give the police the means to perform their responsibilities safely so that they can go home to their families, because they have families too. They have dreams, wants, desires, aspirations for this American way of life we're living. At the same time, they have a responsibility and they have a culpability to their actions and behaviors. How many years were you in residency?
Too long. 5 plus 1?
9.
Yeah, right.
9 years.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
9 years of general surgery.
I won't say too long for 6 again. Right.
For cardiac surgery.
Right.
17 years of education, including college, before I was licensed to use a knife.
Yeah, right.
And police, I'm not diminishing the police, but our situation is similar.
Yeah.
They are put in school and class arguably from 16 weeks to 2.5 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
And then they're given a gun. That's a very difficult position to put anyone in.
I know.
And they're given a gun in there, and they're required to be responsible.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult to do. I don't think at one point I think we need to change our distribution of finances for the police. At the same time, I don't know if we're giving the police what they need to affect their lives safely.
Right.
To affect their responsibilities in a safe way.
Absolutely. Just what you talked about, our training, so much of our training is really about learning the presence, the physical and mental presence of how to handle yourself in a stressful situation. When there's blood everywhere,
right.
and it's hot in the room, and everything, all the hell's breaking loose, you need to do your job. And the police, I really empathize with them, because they're in the same situation we are, and like you said, but they're actually under threat. You and I aren't actually under threat when we're operating.
Sure.
Imagine trying to do surgery with a gun coming at our head or whatever else.
Yeah.
But
But we have that person's life in our hands.
Right.
We're responsible for their lives, and in my mind, that power that we have comes with great responsibility, and I cannot blame my patient for suffering under my care.
Right.
It's not their fault,
Right.
because their anatomy didn't do what I told them to do.
Right.
Their disease process didn't behave the way I told them to do. They didn't submit the way they were supposed to. I can't place the blame on the patient.
Right.
I as part of our training.
Right.
As part of our training,
Right.
we take responsibility for the outcomes of our patients.
Right. And most cops, I think, have that same approach. They accept responsibility for the situation, and they know it's how they approach it, and they do an amazing, excellent job at it.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. What else? Anything else you want to cover? Anything else you want to talk about? We're just getting started.
Pretty much.
There's
so much.
I know.
So much.
Any other solutions you can think of as far as that? Oh, let me ask you something about in terms of socialism versus capitalism. It kind of seems to me. I mean, the Democratic Party has been the champions of supporting minorities and racial issues from as long as I've been alive. And they deserve a hell of a lot of credit for that.
The Democratic Party used to be the Republican Party.
Right.
Okay? So there was a switch after Johnson. So
Right. And I tend to be in the middle. I mean, you're the one who introduced me to POTUS on
Sure.
Sirius Radio, which is really a very neutral station. And The
It's hard to find those.
I know they are. Even POTUS is veering a little bit, but anyway, and so I guess part of the question is what are some solutions that can benefit, that can help, that don't just seem to be a flat out more socialist type of answer. And I realize the Republicans use socialism as a threat to get us all scared of the Red Army coming in. But you know what I mean, as far as I think, or maybe you can help me determine what I mean.
That the thing is, we have to read. We have to understand our politics. We have to understand the application of our intentions. You know, we all want an equal, safe, secure society. Everybody wants that. We all want every human being to have opportunities, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We all want that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't exist for so many people, and what one group calls socialism is socialist when it applies to their enemy.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's capitalism when it applies to them.
Yeah.
Okay,
or a safety net.
Sure.
Right. Which is okay. Everybody's okay with that.
When we're bailing out the airline industry, it's okay.
Right.
Okay, but some form of welfare or job security or maternal leave, any of these things, it's socialism. Most people who use the words socialism don't understand what it is, and don't understand that our system of government is not a pure capitalistic system. It's blended.
Right.
There's so many socialistic things that we have. 911.
Right.
911 is a definition of big government.
Right.
Okay. The most conservative small government person. 2:00 in the morning, he has chest pain. Going to pick up the phone and dial 911.
Yeah.
He's not going to say, "I hate my big government. I will refuse to 911. I'm having chest pain." It happens like that.
Absolutely.
We're happy to use these and I'm not I'm not on the Bernie wagon or the conservative right wagon. I just picked Bernie because so often we talk about socialism associated with Bernie, and
he was actually willing to say it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I'm not on any particular matter. I think that I'm really consider myself to be just slight left of the middle.
Yeah.
But we have to have sensitivity. The most important thing we have in terms of moving forward is to have sensitivity to the situations that have existed for hundreds of years. And to say and to stop saying we can't do this for you. We can't do this because it's not right. We didn't, because you've already done it for somebody else.
Right.
You already did it for somebody
Right.
else. Okay. Let's talk about the GI Bill. You already did it.
Right.
And that opportunity, the failed promise of democracy, as it's described.
Yeah.
That failed promise, it was expressed to generations of people.
Yeah.
So I'm not asking for some great handout, but a balance would be nice.
Right. Especially due to past circumstances
That's
that have led to this situation. Doesn't seem like that much to ask. In those regards, it seems like we are battling it out. Anybody who makes between probably 20 grand and $1 million are battling it out over these issues when, God, it just seems like the frickin' corporations, it just seems like there's a few examples of corporations and CEOs just taking home billions, and people with the $50 million yachts and Elizabeth Warren's proposal of anything, because of the cost of goods is all the same for all of us. The price of a car and a house and a Rolex watch is the same. Once you get over 50 million, isn't there a reason to start just
You're sounding like a socialist. You're
I know. I mean, it's one of those things. You look at it, you go, "How much more money do you need?
Yeah.
You need how many yachts? Like what the f?" And corporations just making just, it seems like crazy money, and the military, so much money spent on the military, and going to Mars and the space exploration. How much billions we spend on that when we're not taking care of our freaking neighborhoods, but
our vets.
Our vets,
just take care of vets.
But I'm asking you to tell me the conservative capitalistic side of why we don't want to necessarily tax corporations and people making 50 million and billionaires, because what I usually hear is, well, you're never going to get the money. They're just going to leave or hide it offshore, stuff like that. But is that too easy of an answer of a bailout to go, let's just stick it to the real rich, you know?
It's a very difficult question, because I was Army Reserve, you know, and I know I've been in a room with 15 or 20 soldiers, lower ranks than me. I know that in that group of people, I personally paid more taxes that year than the entire room paid in taxes.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But did I have a privilege that equaled the excess in tax that I paid above what everybody else paid? The capitalist says, if I'm paying more taxes, I should get more privilege.
Right.
The problem is that as the capitalist gets more and more privilege, then there's less and less of a tax resource base to support those people that can't take care of themselves. And arguably, government doesn't exist for you and me. Government is unimportant for you and I. Government gets in our way.
Yeah.
Government exists for people who can't take care of themselves. You know, to make our roads straight, to put our roads straight, to put sidewalks and telephone poles and water, and help those people that can't help themselves. And so we have to have a balanced approach. You know, I think people should have a right to their privilege. People should have a right to make more money and more money and more money. At the same time, somehow we have to come up with an amount of privilege that is just
a little absurd. And it's going to be to help them, because they'll be more connected to humans and mankind and everybody else, and we'll be helping them along the way.
Absolutely.
That sounds like a communist statement I've never heard of, but
it's difficult to, you know, when you say a rising tide lifts all boats, some people are like, well, I want my boat to rise faster than everybody else's. I don't want all the boats to rise, you know.
Right.
But that's okay.
Right.
You know, I've worked pretty hard to get my boat to rise.
Yeah.
Why should I have to pull the other boat up with me?
Yeah. Well, and that's, you know, I'm going to mention something about Tony Robbins real quick, because he has 6 basic human motivations. The first 2 are security and insecurity. The middle 2 are relevance and connection and love. And the last 2 are growth and contribution. And I think it's really important, because that security and insecurity are what are kind of our base things. It's like, you know, Erickson's basic, you know, pyramid of,
absolutely,
you know, or whoever the other guy was. And the reason why I like that,
Freud.
Yeah, exactly, Freud. And the reason why I like that is because it reminds me of what is my when I'm reacting to a situation. What is my motivation? What is triggering in me to draw this emotional response and this thought? And that security and insecurity is such a basic initial thing to do. Mm-hmm. And my reaction to my kids, you know, part of it, the idea of we all should start equal. Well, part of it as a dad, I think, well, no, part of the reason why I do bust my ass and work extra hard is because I want my kids to be more than equal.
Right.
I want them to have a better life and a better start than other people. That's why I'm busting my ass, and that's part of why I'm doing it. And so, but the part that I need to remember is, yeah, but how much more do they need? I mean, maybe 5%? Like, because if they had 100% more than somebody else to start, do I really want that? No, I don't want that. That's terrible for the other person. And even 5%, if you really think about it, because that means another person is 5% less. Do you really want that? It's, you know, I mean, and my point about that is getting away from that insecurity, battling for survival, which we're not really doing because we have a house and food. No one's really attacking our existence. And going more towards your goal is to contribute, to grow, to connect with other people.
I think that there's a balance of experience that we can give to our children as well. I certainly want my daughter to have anything and everything that she can get in life. And if I could provide for her and her not to have to lift a finger, I would beat my chest every day. Like I'm Superman. I would love for her to just travel the world and experience new cultures and new things every day and not have to lift a finger. Yeah. At the same time, what type of human being am I creating? Am I delivering to society if she's just a bon vivant?
Yeah.
You know, I have to instill in her some sense of connectedness to her world, to society,
Yeah.
some responsibility to society. And if she has no pain in her life, if she doesn't understand pain
Yeah.
in any form or fashion, she cannot be sensitive to those people that cannot give to her what I have been able to give. And then that's not a human being that I want to spend any time with.
Right.
You know, and I can't expect someone to spend time with my daughter and to have a good, full life if she's that type of person that I've made.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Hallelujah.
so I have to somehow put my hands in my pockets,
Yeah.
grab my pants, hold on, and don't pull my hands out of my pocket and let my daughter have some pain in this world and see other people in pain.
Yeah.
For her to be a good person. You know?
Totally. I think we're going to end it with that. That was beautiful, and that'll be a nice thing to go to bed and think about and dream on and appreciate everything that's gone into our existence, and that feeling pain and suffering and other people's pain and suffering and our own is what allows us to connect with each other, and hopefully as a white male I have a greater appreciation for what people of color undergo and can connect to them and help them, because that's
I with a tear in my eye, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. I pray that other people in your situation listen to you and move in your direction. I'm not asking for a huge change, but I am asking for sensitivity. Every day in my life, I ask for sensitivity, and the sensitivity that I have seen in you to this situation is overwhelming to me. I say you're a unicorn, because how many opportunities have I had to talk to super high achieving privileged people like yourself and had no change in their personality or their behavior or their understanding of the world. But to have you look at me and say, hey, wow, I get it. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks everybody for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in, and we'll get Philippe on Facebook so that he can join us for the next one.
Get off my lawn.
All right, bye guys. Good night. Thanks, Philippe. Appreciate it.
Thank you.